You're listening to Crushing Club Marketing, a podcast for progressive club leaders ready to increase their club's revenue. Time for change begins right now. Running a multi-million-dollar enterprise is serious business, and private club managers know it's not easy to coordinate a team of people and also create strategic alignment with club leadership. Ryan Dorr is a former club manager, certified business coach, and the CEO of Strategic Club Solutions. In this episode, Ryan and I talk about strategic planning and the use of operational systems to help you create the club that every GM envies. So if you have a formal short and long-term club strategy at your club, then you appreciate the value it brings to your club. If you're more of a strategy on a napkin kind of person and deep down you know you need more, but you're wrestling with budgets, a board, or even you're just trying to figure out the best way to approach this, you're not alone, all right? Ryan Dorr has been in the private club industry since the early 2000s. He's worked as a GM. He's also worked in various capacities at Club Corp and now as a consultant. On top of that, he's a certified business coach, an EOS facilitator, and he also founded and facilitates Club Masterminds, a group that offers education, coaching, and mentoring for club leaders. So if there's someone who's well-positioned to share his insight about operations and operational systems and approaches for clubs, it's Ryan Dorr. Ryan, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is I'm looking forward to our conversation today, and you've got such great experience in the club industry and in hospitality, and leadership is a wonderful combination of talents that you have accumulated and built through the years. So let's start with this, though. For people who are not familiar with Strategic Club Solutions, how about a quick overview of who you are, what you guys do?
Sure. Well, we take clubs from good to great. We help clubs create happy members, hire the right people, and plan for a strong future. We've got a we're a full service consulting firm with a team of experts across all the verticals that you would typically find inside of a private club.
That's terrific. Wow, that's succinct. You practiced the elevator pitch clearly.
Working on it.
So this is an interesting time in the club space, and with after the economy tanking in 2008 and the recession, it feels like clubs are starting to build their way back, and it always feels like we're maybe another recession away from being set back again, but. In this newer era, what do you see happening with your clients and clubs and the conversations you're having as far as like what is working for them?
Well, I would say that the biggest investment we're seeing clubs make today is in a long-term strategic plan and really taking a step back and looking at their financial health, their organizational structure, their succession planning. The clubs that are doing it right, the ones that are full of the wait list. Interesting, we did a poll at the last CMA conference, and of the couple hundred participants that came by our booth and took our questionnaire, 82% of clubs either have a strategic plan or in the process of putting a strategic plan in place, and 85% of those clubs are either full of the wait list or within 10 members of being full of the wait list.
Wow.
So that was pretty powerful that it shows that the process is working and that the clubs that invest in planning for their future are the ones that are really doing the best because they've got the board and the management team on the same path, on the same page, moving in the same direction.
Has it been, in your opinion, and what you've experienced and witnessed firsthand through your career, are clubs operating more like businesses today than they have in the past? And I say that like recognizing they always have been, but it seems like some clubs haven't always treated their club as a business.
I think they're starting to be more mindful of that. There's a couple clubs that have really kind of gone over, above and beyond and set a good example as, if you really invest the time and energy into it and get members behind, what the club's all about, you can do great things. And I think from a business standpoint, as clubs have shifted to that GM COO model, they're entrusting more managers to run the club like a business. Now, that said, we're still talking about member-owned clubs that are 501c7 not-for-profit, entities that typically have food and beverage operations that lose money and, because it's an amenity, that sort of thing. But I would say that more and more clubs are trying to be smarter about that and realize that just because it's okay to lose money in food and beverage as an amenity doesn't mean you have to. And that there are other opportunities to make sure that, you're being good stewards of the resources the club has. And if there's a gap between expectations and finances, then, how do we solve for that? Is it that we need to charge more dues? Do we need to adjust operating hours because we're open hours that no one's really using it? There's different ways to approach each of those challenges. But I would say more and more clubs are getting more called business savvy and trying to trust more in their general manager than have the board make more emotional decisions and really have some sound facts behind it.
Yeah, interesting. The boy, I just thought of another board question, but let's stick with where we are. It's there are some clubs that have always been healthy, always will be healthy, never need to worry about driving new members, generating revenue. They're always great. Then there's this chunk that's I think of them as being aspirational. They're close. They're the challenger clubs, and then those who are just really really struggling. But beyond that, but what do you see in your work the most common breakdowns, if you will, the things that are preventing those clubs from going from good to great?
It's really the governance structure. And, it's funny, even when I was managing clubs, like 85 to 90% of all the problems boil down to communication, right? And it starts with expectations. It starts with, having a clear direction. Does the manager know where he's going, what the expectations are? Does the board know what the expectations are? I mean, there's a lot of clubs in it, and it's interesting how the ones that struggle seem to mirror up with the same problems, right? They don't have a tight onboarding program for board members. There's not a strong nominating process. The clubs that don't have a criteria to be on the board, expectations of being on the board, accountability for board members knowing what their role is, from advisory and strategic standpoint versus, am I joining the Greens committee so I can make sure the Greens are stimping at 13.5 for me and my buddies next week? Or am I on the Greens committee to make sure that we're, as a club, keeping the quality of the golf experience where it needs to be? So, those are the types of things that, we typically see the breakdown is there's a breakdown in understanding and expectations of which role each of the players are playing, both on the board and on the management team.
How difficult is that for you to help your clients and your clubs see that? If they first come to you and you're like, oh my gosh, this seems so obvious. Is it obvious to them where they're breaking down as well? Or is it kind of like, geez, we just don't really know?
It depends, but I would say, typically, it's like anybody with a problem. It starts with admitting you have a problem.
Right.
And so, I think typically it takes one board president or board leader to raise his hand and say, this is way harder than this is supposed to be. And why is that the case? And so typically it just takes an awareness, or it takes a strong manager that gets hired to come in and fix something. And, the board has deflected all the responsibility to the staff. But at the end of the day, it's the board that needs to take ownership for the lack of leadership and direction. So, I think those are the hard conversations to have. I would say a majority of folks that we're working with have at least identified that something's not right. They're not quite sure what it is, or they've identified that the board governance structure is right, but they don't know how to transition into a new structure or a more effective structure, or what that's even supposed to look like.
Mm-hmm. As a business coach, you see this kind of stuff within the club industry, but also outside of the club industry as well, and getting people to, in some cases, admit that there's an issue, or sometimes the issue is at the leadership level as well, right? I mean, those are difficult conversations to have, aren't they?
They are, and I think a lot of times, general managers in particular can be, afraid of bringing on a consultant, or going to the board saying, hey, something's wrong here. I think we need to bring in a third party to help us sort through it. But then there's always the situation where you've got a manager that's just not performing, and then the board's not sure where to go or how do we go from here, or the one fascinating thing about the club industry that you don't find in any other business is where else are your customers driving the direction of the business.
Oh my gosh,
right?
right.
And so, in normal business, you wouldn't go hire an auto mechanic to work as a brain surgeon. You wouldn't go hire, a guy who runs their own manufacturing company to manage your golf course. Why is this different? And so that's where I think unpacking the conversation, getting the board member to say, listen, you're here as members of this establishment to help make sure we're providing what members want. And I was having a conversation with Horst Schulze, one of the co-founders of Ritz-Carlton the other day, and he said, don't do it, when you're working with, hospitality. The reason Ritz was so popular and successful was it wasn't what they liked. They went to the market and asked the market what they wanted, and then they built it and did it the best they could. And so I think a lot of times you get boards that are so focused on what they want as a board member, not what the club wants as a whole.
Oh man, that is so good. I mean, it's the hardest thing to do as well, because it's especially if you're a club that's trying to grow membership and attract new people. It's so often it's like, what does that, who is your best prospect and what do they want? That's awesome. Let's talk a little bit more, Ryan, about your work as an EOS implementer. So if you're listening to the podcast and you've ever come across the book, or someone, maybe an associate, has read the book called Traction, it's by a guy named Gino Wickman. It's essentially, the book Traction is a platform. It's the entrepreneurial operating system. And Ryan, you're an implementer of this, and have had a chance to work with some clubs in implementing this. How would you describe for our listeners what EOS is and how it's made an impact with your clubs?
Sure. So I think the biggest difference in EOS versus traditional strategic planning is it's kind of a strategic planning 2.0. It mixes up the order in which you would typically go about the process, right? So EOS really starts with the idea of a system and the people, and making sure you've got the right people on the bus, and are they in the right seat, and do they GWC their seat, right? So do they get it? Do they want it? And do they have the capacity to do it? So really, whereas traditional strategic planning says, okay, well, what do our customers say? Let's do a SWOT analysis, and let's kind of, unpack and figure out who are we as an organization and where do we want to go, right? And we take all the survey data and we find out, okay, in a normal club, we want to talk about, the golf course conditions or clubhouse renovations or this, that, and the other. Whereas at EOS, it's like, well, first we got to make sure we got the right people on the team, and then what's the right structure? So talking about organizational structure and governance and all those things. The way that EOS sets up an org chart, or what they call as an accountability chart, you typically have a visionary who sets a strategic vision for the organization. Then you have an integrator, which is really the go-to, get it done, person who's driving the day-to-day business.
Like
and
an
then
operations type role, right? I mean, that's
Yep. And then you've got your individual department heads. Most companies have sales and marketing, operations, and finance. Obviously you can unpack those a little bit wider. In a club, you might have golf course operations, clubhouse operations, those types of things. You may have a clubhouse manager that has multiple direct reports. You may have a golf course superintendent with multiple direct reports. But anyway, you set up this organizational structure or accountability chart, and then you build it with no names, right? And then you say, as an organization, what are the right roles? Like, what does this person need to accomplish for the organization to be successful? And so you define those roles, and then you plug in the names and say, okay, well, because maybe you're building an organization where it has the same person's name in multiple boxes because the organization is not big enough to support that role separately. One of those roles we see right now is this communications director. Our bigger clubs have already formed it on as a full-time position, but with all the media that has to be managed today, through digital, print, in-club signage, emails, phone calls, all that stuff, clubs are determining that they really need a full-time dedicated person to manage that. and some are doing a blended. The membership director is sort of responsible for it. She does some, but might manage a third party that's doing some of the creative. But so that's an example where, the membership director's name might be in the communications director and the membership director's seat.
Sure.
But then the goal over the next year or 3 years would be to create that as a separate position.
So can we pause just really quickly on that, Ryan? So so that whole idea of the accountability chart, or as most businesses think of it as an org chart, in building that out in a way so that you don't attach your current team to that, because so often, and I'm sure you see this all the time, it's like you've got people who have either been with the club for a long time, and boy, they're you tolerate them. They may not be high performers, but when you strip names away and you say, what do we need to do to really accomplish our goals, then you get the right roles. And then, for a lot of clubs, I'm sure you see this, is that the hard part is saying, gosh, you built this thing out. It's like all of a sudden, Ed, he's not the right guy for that job, for what we need him to do. But at the end, you've got, if you have all those people, and it's the old Jim Collins, right person, right seat thing, then you're in a better position to execute the goals that you set for yourself, right?
Absolutely. And, it's good that you mentioned that, because so many times you have that Peter principled employee who started as a server or as a backroom attendant, and a position opened up, and they're like, well, who's going to be our dining room manager? We like Jimmy. Jimmy's been here for 5-6 years. He's a great server. I always get great service when I come into the dining room. Let's make him the dining room manager. And then next thing you know, 2 or 3 years later, food and beverage director leaves. Jimmy's great. Let's just promote Jimmy.
Right.
Well, if you're not equipping Jimmy with the right tools to be successful, his only experience is ever at that place. And so if he wasn't properly mentored, or has not gone for outside training, or is not getting, professional development, Jimmy's only going to be as good as Jimmy's going to be.
Right.
And so what ends up happening is that's how clubs get so stuck, is that you've got Peter principled employees or legacy thinking that's holding you back. And sometimes you just need somebody to come in and help pull back the curtain and say, why does it have to be that way?
Mm-hmm.
Why does it always have to be the way that it's always been?
So you have the foundation built in, around your core values, the focus, and what as a club you're trying to do, and you've got your accountability chart or your org chart built out with the right jobs, and then the right people in the right seats. But you said something a second ago, Ryan, about the visionary, and the kind of being the person has a vision for the club, and then an integrator, which is more like that operations, in some ways like a general manager. It could be the general manager. How does that work for you when you're working with your clubs?
So, that's really one of the big discussions now. A lot of dysfunctional clubs, no one's guiding anything. They're all just reacting to what's going on around them. And that's typically when, a club or board raises their hand and admits that they're stuck. That's where the conversation really has to start. So, when we're sitting there and unpacking these concepts, we really want to make sure that we have that hard discussion. And this does take an investment of time, in order to get everybody bought in and to get the right plan together. It does involve some time, but it does pay off in dividends. And so having that conversation with the board and the manager, some boards are like, hey, we don't really want to manage the club. We just like to be members. We'd like to help guide strategic vision. We'd like to help support the general manager. And then therefore they're looking for a general manager that's really going to be the visionary and kind of cast the forward direction. In other cases, the board wants to be the visionary, and they need to hire a great operator that's going to, be a good financial steward and a good leader and build a great, strong team, and, lean on the board for that strategic vision. But, that's really, part of the conversation. And the even harder conversation is some of these clubs that are still stuck in the three-legged stool model, where the board's actually the integrator today. They're the ones that are telling the golf pro, the superintendent, or the club manager how to operate. And so, depending on which phase the club is in or what structure they have today, it's just a simple, it's not an easy discussion, but it's a simple discussion to start to talk through, to say, why does this make more sense or not? Or is our current structure part of the reason we're dysfunctional, or maybe not growing, we're just kind of stagnant?
Right.
And that's how we kind of start to unpack that.
It seems like it will be. I mean, there are a lot of different ways to do this. I mean, David Chagg at the Country Club at Brookline is fairly. I always tell him he's visionary. He looks at me like I'm crazy, but I think he actually is fairly visionary in how he operates. But it almost seems like the ideal situation would be to have the board. If you're a GM listening to this, it'd be ideal to have your board with setting the vision and letting you, as the GM, run and execute on that vision. And like you said, so often you get the board that's acting as the GM. But is that a if you had a club that said, our board, all they did is they cast a vision for me and it's my job to execute, would that sort of be like a dream situation for you?
That's really how it works the best, because how often like we talked about before, how often is what other business would, like if you're running a manufacturing company, you wouldn't go hire a brain surgeon to run your business.
Right.
If you were running a lawn mowing service, you wouldn't go hire a restaurateur. So why in our business, where we have customers guiding the vision and actually managing the business with no experience in the field of business that we're in, that's really why clubs have moved to that GM COO model, so that the members are members and not necessarily trying to be experts in hospitality and club operations. So that's where it's really important that clubs understand that, as board members, we don't know what we don't know about the club business. We know what it's like to be a customer. We know how we want to be treated, but we don't necessarily know how to operate the club.
Right.
You can do common sense, but that's where hiring a professional general manager, looking at outside, resources like consultants or someone to do your member survey or someone to help you with food and beverage training, because those are people that are experts in those businesses. And if you're running any other business, you wouldn't look at it any differently. For whatever reason, though, sometimes logic gets checked at the door of the boardroom, and it's a lot of emotions that get uncovered in those board meetings. And at the end of the day, having these plans, these strategic plans or these EOS plans are what separate the best clubs from the average club, is because they've decided to invest time, money, and energy into coming up with a cohesive plan to work together as an organization between members, board, and management. Everybody understands their role. Everybody's on the bus. You got the right people on the bus. You're moving in the same direction together. And it's amazing what clubs can do. And just with going through the planning exercise, there's one level of accomplishment, and then the clubs that actually implement it, it's amazing the results that they see.
Yeah, it's interesting. So with clear vision, strong leadership, another piece of EOS and traction is just accountability, and I should mention that we are an EOS shop here at Storyteller, and we always talk about having a culture of accountability, and yet that can be really challenging, can it? Especially in the club. I mean, not just in the club space, but for a lot of businesses, people that will hold other people accountable for their responsibilities and things that have to be done. I mean, in all businesses, you hear people, water cooler chat, or people grousing about so and so who's not carrying their weight, and the execution of accountability, though, is, and you see this in your business coaching, I'm sure as well, is not easy, is it?
No, definitely not. And,
yeah.
And I think, it all starts with setting the expectation. We were actually speaking at the Philadelphia Club Managers Association 2 days ago, and it was on this very topic. And we were, kind of going around the room asking, what are some of the biggest challenges? How about food and beverage training? A few people raised their hand. How about, golf operations? We're talking about consistency. How do you deliver a consistent experience every day, and where do you have those gaps? And I said, by a show of hands, how many people actually have a formal, structured onboarding and training program for new servers in the dining room? And most people didn't have it, because so many times clubs have just kind of gotten in the habit of, "Hi, Jim. Today's your first day. This is Susie. She's going to be your trainer. Follow her. Do what she does for the next 3 days, and you'll be successful." Well, Susie's been waiting tables for 20 years, and she's kind of got a watered down understanding, and she's got her own shortcuts. And so, and even if the club does have a training program, they're not necessarily using it, or it hasn't been updated in a while because you've had management turnover and no one really remembers how it works. And, so in order to have accountability, you got to have set expectations. And so, part of what EOS does, as well as, traditional strategic planning, is you want to set an actual plan, and not just the goal or the objective, but, what's the action plan? What are the to-dos? What are the issues that come up in accomplishing those goals each quarter and each month? And so, Traction refers to, or EOS refers to them as rocks, but, rocks are essentially goals that people set for each other on a monthly and quarterly basis. And so, as you're working through those on a week-to-week basis in your level 10 meeting or your department head meeting, you're raising your hand and saying, hey, I have an issue with this. I know I said that I would take this rock for the quarter, but I'm running into some trouble. I need some help. Just because you're accountable doesn't mean you have to actually do all the work yourself. It just means you're responsible to make sure it gets done.
Yeah, someone's got to own it.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And only one person can own it, because if more than one person owns it, no one's accountable to it.
Yeah.
Right. And they get to pass it off on the other person.
One of the things I love about, and just if you're listening to this is not a commercial for EOS and Traction. I mean, in fact, we'll shift away from this in a minute here, Ryan. But there's so many interesting breakdowns that happen in accountability, responsibility, communication that the tool actually helps with. So that whole idea of, we're talking about this idea of rocks, which are really like just big things that have to get done in your club. And we've all sat in meetings, and you've sat in your departmental meetings, and it's like, there's no point, right? It just goes on and on and on, and everyone's got something that's like, and you never solve anything. It's just like it's like, these kind of, just big wastes of time, right? Yeah. I mean, it's like, and so this gives a structure for that, and it helps bring some focus and clarity around it.
Yeah. The level 10 meeting is something that we found a lot of clubs who have been suffering from death by meeting, which is a great book, by the way. I think the genius behind the level 10 meeting is that it's structured. There's a scorecard. Everybody is already in this planning process, determined what success looks like and where we need to be each week or each month. And so by a quick review of the scorecard, we're either on track or off track. If we're off track, you ask the group, is it an issue? The answer is no, because the person who's accountable for it said it's not. Then you move on. If the answer is yes, it goes on the issues list. Once you get down through the scorecard and you do your check-ins, and you go to the issues list, and we say, okay, on the issues list, what are we going to solve today? And then you go through the IDS period, which is identify, discuss, and solve, and you prioritize the things that are issues to get done as a team. And so the beauty behind that is that they stop being things that we just keep talking about, and we actually do something about it. Right. And from the issues list and that, as you go through the EOS process, you're putting things on the to-do list with dates, and if it's on the to-do list for more than 2 weeks, then it's an issue again. And it's because really the to-do list is stuff that should be getting done between meetings, and so it takes some discipline and it takes some practice, and it's not perfect out of the gate. But as EOS says, if we can get to be 80% good, 80% of the time performing at this level, the company will be wildly successful.
Yeah, it's pretty good. And that whole idea of the to-dos is, and you see it. It's like, how come Ed never gets his to-dos done? And eventually, at least in our meetings for sure, is there an issue with the fact that you can't get this done? And it might be that you need help. It might be that it's not clear. It might be, that Ed's just lazy.
For it.
What's that?
Or it might be that you shouldn't be responsible for it.
Exactly. Yeah. And one of the things I love as well, and then we can move off of this if that's good with you, Ryan. But the other thing is that is so cool is that it's called a level 10 meeting because a 10 is a rating. The 10 is the highest rating. So at the end of each meeting, everyone in the room rates it as to whether or not it's been a good use of their time. And we've had meetings here where people are like, it's a 5. And our policy is anything below an 8, we have to understand why, so we can make them better, so that people come to the meetings going, this is a good use of my time, which I had never been in a meeting. I don't know about you, Ryan, but I'd never been in a meeting like that before we started using, EOS.
Yeah, that's not typically a a best practice other than with EOS.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important too, because it does, as a manager, it lets you know where your team is at. And another thing that we've done that I did with coaching is kind of a checkout when we do group discussions and team meetings, is we would always whiffle when we get out of the meeting, and that stands for what I feel like expressing. And it's basically a 3 to 5 word. It can just be a 1-word thing. It can be, I feel like expressing that this was a great meeting, or I feel like expressing that I'm really frustrated or overwhelmed, or, and so there's just kind of a way to exit the meeting. Everybody gets off their chest what they're thinking. And you as a manager know, I could tell Susie was stewing over there in the corner. I should probably see what's on her mind, so, but it's just good to have some kind of a checkout, whether it's a rating, whether it's a
whiffle
or something like that. There's a lot of different things you can use, but those are some good best practices in general for meetings.
I love the whiffle. Let's just just as we turn away from this for a second, Ryan, let's talk about just the need for strategic planning, whether it's EOS or another tool or another way to get that done. It's in this day and age, if you're a general manager and you're listening, you're like, yeah, this all makes sense, but you're having a hard time with your board communicating the need for a strategic plan, or maybe you're privately owned. How would you coach a GM to introduce this and try to, because it's an investment, right? I mean, you're spending money to bring in outside help. How would you recommend communicating that?
Sure. Well, we've found that the clubs that aren't already doing some sort of planning are the ones that are stuck, right? And so typically the way that we recommend GMs are bringing this to light is that, listen, this isn't because we can't do it internally. It's because we shouldn't do it internally. We're too close to it, and we need somebody from the outside to come in and help us to understand with no filter where we are as an organization, how do we get better, and what are the things that the membership and the club wants, not just what the GM or the board wants. And so, in some cases, if the club's trying to navigate some big path of change, they almost want a third party so they can run cover behind them a little bit. But
no doubt,
really at the end of the day, people that do strategic planning or EOS, I mean, that's what they do for a living, and they're good at it. And whether it's our company or somebody else, there's about a half a dozen companies that do that in the private club space. But those conversations are so critical that we try to talk with the GM, and then our goal is to actually just meet with the board directly and help us understand, because it's not about selling somebody a plan, it's about solving a problem.
No, right.
And so when you're truly doing strategic planning, it's not just a boilerplate solution. There's a process to follow that gets great results, but it's not necessarily it's different for each club and each business. So understanding where the stakeholders are, what they're wanting to accomplish out of it. Sometimes people come to us and say, well, we want a strategic plan, and it's really not what they need. They're looking for something else. They're trying to treat symptoms. And at the end of the day, you have to have that good, strong foundation. But sometimes we got to do some housekeeping before we really dive into that deeper conversation. If there's some personnel issues, or if there's some organizational issues or drama, as you know, Ed, having gone through EOS, people will deselect from the team once they understand they're going to be held accountable and that things are moving in a positive direction. Unfortunately, there are a lot of organizations with people just kind of sitting around.
Yeah.
But I think with for a GM that's trying to convince his board or leadership to bring in some help for strategic planning or surveys, sometimes you just have to take baby steps. And we offer something that's called an opportunity assessment to just kind of come in and give you tell you what we see. It's a no risk type thing. And then sometimes that helps build some confidence and rapport and trust. If it's a more adversarial type, situation where there's just a lot of tension, they're not quite sure that they're ready to commit to a full plan. The other thing is that, managers should just point out as a best practice, all these other clubs, the best run clubs are doing this. Why wouldn't we do it?
Right.
If we're one of the best, why wouldn't we do what the best are doing? And they're investing, the best run clubs are investing in a strategic plan every 3 to 5 years. They're doing annual member surveys. They have all kinds of great data. They're doing real time in season, feedback from members. And they're really invested in the experience and delivering on that plan and that club culture. And so I think, for a manager that's stuck, that's trying to look for a path out or a path to unstuck, starting with a strategic plan, or at least getting some data from the members, so that it's not what the board thinks, it's not what the manager thinks. Let the members tell you what they want, and have a professional company that does surveys help you with that. Because if the board writes them, 9 times out of 10 when we see a board written survey, they're very leading. The questions are very leading.
Sure.
And although, it may save the club a couple $1,000s, at the end of the day, if it's not the right data, it doesn't help you.
Right.
And, chances are that volunteer board has more important things to do with their time.
Right. So those questions like, our dining room service is getting better, isn't it? Check yes or no.
Right. Right.
And I mean, all this to say that if your club isn't healthy, if you've got a lot of dysfunction, bringing in Ryan and his team, or any consultant for that matter, they can't fix a mess that doesn't want to be fixed. Or we started saying this basically, like, you can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped. I mean, so it's so important to keep in mind. What do you think, Ryan, is as you look at the club industry and this transition and the boomers getting older and the aging memberships and this focus on younger members and really just the need for so now here's my leading question. It's there's clubs are expressing an interest in saying, how do we better attract this audience? When you think about strategic planning, what do you see as the future? What are you recommending to clubs as far as how do they adapt, or what do you see as areas that clubs need to adapt to continue to succeed in years to come?
Yeah, and it's different in every market, and it's different for every club. One of the things I think that's so awesome about the club industry is that each club kind of has its own identity and its own niche. And so, that first is a question that has to be answered, is that, what kind of club are we going to be? Do we need to be? Do we want to be? What's the aspirational identity of that club? Whether it's just going from, oh my gosh, we're almost out of business, to being good, or going from good to great, that question still has to get answered. And then once it's answered, if young members are part of the solution to our future, then what do we need to do to attract them? And so as part of that strategic planning process, you look at, are the millennials moving out of downtown into the suburbs? Yes. Mm-hmm. So if I'm a country club, what do I need to do to attract millennials that, may not have or be interested in 3.5 hours on the golf course? Are there other things you can do to appeal to them? Are there other family offerings? I mean, the biggest shift we're seeing right now is people are going from more formal to more casual. They're going to more social programming, more athletic, fitness, and wellness offerings. And, the clubs that are really doubling down, they're building full wellness facilities with spas and fitness. There's a club in Severna Park, Maryland, called Chartwell Golf Country Club. They partnered with Under Armour and built a youth sports performance center adjacent as part of their wellness building that they put up. And talk about the craze. I don't know if you have kids, Ed, but I've got 2 girls that play sports, and the amount of time and money we spend with that kind of stuff is unbelievable. If you can integrate that at the club, whether that's with golf or tennis or swimming or other sports. I mean, lacrosse is booming out here in the Wisconsin market. Yeah. And, so can you incorporate some of those aspects into club activities or club programming, or better yet, get a trainer or a professional athlete or a former collegiate athlete to come in and do programs for kids at the club that are in youth sports. And, clubs that are doing that kind of stuff, it's a way to actually engage that teenager group that most clubs lose.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they usually put them in the summer camps and they keep them, you know, up till age of like 10, 11, 12. And then once they get to middle school, you know, they don't want to go to the club anymore unless they're going to meet their friends there. They want to go do other stuff. And
right.
so you know, it's a way to kind of keep that group engaged and just to offer something. It keeps the club relevant. And if mom and dad are dropping the kids off at the club for that kind of stuff, they're going to stick around for dinner. Right.
Yeah, and I mean, and the innovation that you're seeing out there is so cool, and yet there is a danger in just like knee jerk. Oh, well, let's just add this, let's add that. I mean, so that idea of strategic planning now probably more important than it's been in maybe ever.
Absolutely, because the clubs that are reacting are the ones that it's expensive experiment. You know, and because you haven't really vetted it with the membership, you haven't vetted it financially, you haven't vetted it with, you know, well, how does that impact our brand and our identity as a club? You know, does that compromise it? Does that really put us out there on the edge? Are we devaluing our membership because now we're, you know, offering more access to non-members? Or, I mean, there's all kinds of different things, implications that can happen that if you haven't gone through that formal planning process to kind of vet that out and structure what's really important, you can miss it, and then you get down a rabbit hole. You can't. It's very hard to unwind.
Yeah. So it brings us all the way back to having a clear vision, clear focus for your club, and how important that is as it relates to creating your strategic plan. So Ryan, thanks so much for joining me and our listeners and sharing your insight. It's been really helpful.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And thank you for joining us today. If you find this helpful, be sure to subscribe and stay connected to us at Crushing Club Marketing. Also, check out our monthly webinar series, Crushing Club Marketing Academy. You can find that at storytellermn.com. Until then, keep crushing your club marketing.